you've never prepared a kidney before, I'm going to show you how. First of all, peel off this white membrane. Snip it off with a good pair of scissors. Then we're going to cut the kidney in half down the middle. A good sharp knife. And now what we're going to do is use a pair of good kitchen scissors and cut out this fatty bit in the middle here. You can see I've removed all the white gristle from these kidneys. Now I can cut them into pieces.
Look what I have here. Do you guys know what this is for? Check this out. As you can see, these eyeballs are looking at me. So I'm going to grab one of those out. Look at that. We're going to taste this. See that? I love fish eyeballs. Boiled, yum. We'll just swap it out. Look at that. The Frisco. That's so yummy. Another one there. Now that one. It's got my name on it. Oh, look at that. Yeah. Loving fish eyes. Yum. One more? Okay.
Hello! I am back. It has been a long time between drinks, my friends. But here I am. What's up? How's everybody been? It's been, what? Almost a year, I think, since the last time that I streamed properly. I did a few, like, shitty work with me kind of streams when I was trying to get my thesis done, but apart from that, yeah, it's been a year. I finally finished everything, waiting to get signed off for my master's degree now, so I have time to come back and stream again, and I'm really excited about it, actually. It's been a long time, and I have been thinking about different things to do on the stream and how I wanted to come back. And the first thing that I really wanted to do, because I've been really getting into different political ideologies and stuff recently, is to read the Communist Manifesto, which is what we're going to do tonight. But while we're waiting for people, because I'm hoping we'll have more people today, I can see Potato Cakes is in. How are you? How have you been going? It's been so long. You're okay? I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay. Geez, lots of stuff has happened since I last streamed. And I'm not sure how much of it I've actually sort of talked about on stream. So yeah, I also I'm going to put up a video of this on my YouTube channel after I finished it. I'm going to edit it down a little bit and put it on my YouTube channel. So that is linked in my bio, so feel free to check that out as well, if you can't stay for the whole thing but you want to hear about the stuff without all this needless chatter at the start. So first big thing that's happened since I last streamed is I got a cat. You can see her, she's curled up over there. So I got a cat. Her name is Hamela. I love her to bits. She's adorable. And she's just snoozing, so she'll just be my little co-pilot kitty for today. I have... Let's see, what else have I got going on? Looking for work now. So I'm not working currently. Trying to find some work because I have to register as a psychologist. It's going to cost me like $1,000. So I'm trying to find some work so that I can raise that money. Something that is not lost on me as I am today reading the Communist Manifesto. Let's see. What else is going on? Yeah, not a lot. I've been trying to manage my illness and stuff, and that's about it, really. So, yeah, tell me what you've got going on. That will be great to hear about, and we'll talk about that more as we go, and it'll be great to see people come in and have a chat to them about how they've been. I think last time I was streaming, we were still doing lockdowns and stuff, so it has been a long time. So that is interesting. In terms of the stream, I've updated some of the sounds that you can use on the stream, especially for today because we're doing Communist Manifesto, so I've updated some of those if you feel like doing some of those, using some of those. I have re-upped the community goal because I know people really wanted to reach that goal, so I just keep re-upping it because I'll feel really bad if I just forfeited that because I was away for so long. So I've re-upped that as well. Redone some of the sounds, redone some of the little pop-ups that come up, and I've added a donation button to the channel just in case people felt like they wanted to. I had a couple of people back when I was streaming more often they were tipping in bits or subscribing, but they wanted to be able to give donations directly rather than do that. So I've done that too. Please do not feel obligated to subscribe or donate or anything like that. I do this for fun for the most part anyway, so it's all good. Hydrate. Thank you for keeping me with my hydration, actually, because I'm streaming reading today. Great choice by me. I have tonsillitis and I'm still recovering. Thank you for that. Potato cakes. Yeah, I'm still recovering from my tonsillitis. So, and drinking anything at the moment just feels like, swallowing sand. So, like, my body is rejecting my need to drink anything. So, telling me to hydrate is actually really helpful. Okay. So we got a few people in, a few new people. That's great to see. I'm going to read the Communist Manifesto very shortly, guys. So if you're interested in that, and just talk about, like, some of what it means, and then also talk about, like, my thoughts on it and its relevance to, like, our current situation and all of that sort of stuff. You can see I've been underlining and highlighting stuff. It's not a very long document because it is an essay, essentially, or a manifesto. So I'm going to read through all of it. I don't know if we'll get through all of it tonight, but I'm going to read through all of it eventually on stream and just talk through it. And as I say, I'm going to upload a condensed version of this eventually onto my YouTube channel as well. So yeah, talking about communism, it's just something that I've gotten really interested in sort of the last couple of years. Like, it's always been something that I've been kind of interested in. Politics has always been something I'm kind of interested in. But, you know, it's one of those things where you think, oh God, where do you even begin, right? And I knew that I didn't like a lot of the stuff that was happening just in general, politics in the world. So I was like, okay, well, a lot of the people that I admire and the things, the stuff that they say that I admire, they're into communism and socialism, and they're very anti-capitalist and things like that. So maybe I'll look into sort of some of the touchstones of those things. And so I started with the Communist Manifesto. And so I had a lot of thoughts on it when I was reading it, and I want to sort of talk through it and talk about what you guys think about it. And then also, I might do a few other ones. So, the one that I'm reading currently is a little bit longer. It's called, let me look it up because I cannot remember exactly what it's called. It's, geez, you think I would have remembered because I've been reading it. And I think I like it a bit more than the Communist Manifesto. The Conquest of Bread, it's by Peter Kropotkin, and I'll talk about why I like that more when I get to that one, because I hope to do a little bit of a series of these ones. So I'll talk about that one a little bit more when I get to that. I don't know why my camera is so weirdly placed today. I'll talk about that one a little bit more when I get to that particular book, or why I like it more, and you'll probably get an idea of it as I go through the Communist Manifesto. But yeah, so the Communist Manifesto, it's by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Obviously it needed translating, so this particular version's been translated by Samuel Moore. It's not a particularly long document, and you can find it for free online if you're interested in reading it yourself, making some notes for yourself, going back over any bits of it that I may not have dwelled upon very much, that sort of thing. But please feel free, as I'm talking through it, to ask questions. Not that I can probably answer them, but we can talk about them. You know, make say anything you want to about it as we go through, because, you know, it's all sort of a learning exercise for me as well as for everyone else, so, you know, why not? Hopefully you can hear me. Sorry, I've got my microphone mixed up, but let's have a look at Kitty Corner. Still sleeping, still curled up like a little croissant. Maybe I need to get a second camera so that I can just have a cat camera for the little baby, my little princess. But yeah, so we've got some new sounds and stuff tonight. Let's see. Let's make sure that that's all working for you guys. Looks like sound alerts might be down. Let me just check that it's all ready to go. Sometimes it's plays up a little bit. Says it's all good. Let's just check an alert here. We got a new one today. So let's check that this is working.
It's communism.
There you go. That's that one's there for you to play if you're interested in that one. I added a bunch of dumb stuff, so feel free to have a go at those. Okay, so I feel like
it's communism.
Yeah, I love that one. Alright, let's get started, shall we? Alright. Hi, Kaznak. Welcome to the stream, by the way. Thank you so much for coming along. Okay, so let's get started. So the Communist Manifesto. Oh, I've still got my lights really red and it's very hard for me to see what I'm reading. Hold up. Let me just screw around with these real quick. There we go. That's a little better. Alright. This is written in pretty dense language, so I'm going to pause at times to explain what's going on there to the best of my understanding. It starts off pretty bleak. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not been hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties as well as against its own reactionary adversaries? So that's basically saying that the political parties and things like that are afraid of communism and they use it as kind of a boogeyman. So if something is against their belief, it's immediately labelled as communism, even if it's not. And we see that even today. We see it especially with people like Alex Jones. Does it all the time, and it's not communism at all. Yeah, so, I mean, this was written in... This edition was first published in 98, but I think it was initially written... Oh god, like 1800s or something? I better look that up. I thought it was on the back cover, but it is not, weirdly. Yeah, no, it's not there. I thought it was. Sorry, guys. It was originally published in 1848. So there you go. So, almost like 180 years ago, almost 200 years ago. And we're still seeing people do that today. So still really relevant to today. 2 things result from this fact. 1, communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. And that means, that's kind of like, well, because people are saying it has power, then it has power. If you acknowledge that it has power, then it gives it power, right? And 2, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the spectre of communism with the manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish. So they're basically saying that somebody needed to publish a manifesto so the truth about communism could be known, because people were saying a lot of things were communism, and in that way giving the word communism power. But if there's no manifesto, no set of beliefs around which to organize it, then it could be anything, and then it sort of feeds into this rhetoric of calling everything communism when it's not. So we're going to move on now to the first section, which is the bourgeois and the proletarians. And they explain what these 2 things are pretty well, because they're words that you're going to hear a lot. And you probably hear the word bougie a lot, which is a derivative of bourgeois. And it's used as kind of a joking term now, but it's absolutely not used as a joking term in this at all. So if you hear bourgeois, that is, it's not someone who orders a $5 coffee at all. And we're going to go into what that means in a minute. Hey, Lady Luck, how are you? It's been so long. I hope you're doing well. I've missed everybody. And please forgive me if I pause to drink and things. As I said before, I've got tonsillitis. Or if my voice breaks a little bit. We got Marty McCawson tonight moderating, so please be kind, because they don't do that very often. I finally finished my masters, so I'm just waiting for everything to come through, and then I got to register and everything, and then I can start working. So I'm really excited about it. And I thought that I would celebrate by reading the Communist Manifesto. We're just about to get into the bourgeois and the proletarians right now. But feel free to screw around with sounds, interrupt me while I'm talking, say anything about it, whatever.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, my McHorse, my love. Okay. Oh yeah, that might be the other thing too. I think last time I streamed, Marty McHorse and I were dating but not together, and we're definitely together now and have been for over a year. Also, my tiny child, my baby, my little ham is back there, so we might get some kitty cam footage at some point. Alright, back to it. The bourgeois and the proletarians. The history of all hitherto existing societies is a history of class struggles. So saying class struggle has always existed. Free man and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman. In a word, oppressor, bourgeois, and oppressed, proletarian.
Yeah.
You played the Yeah Babies. I only heard half of that. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's, hopefully that works now. Let me just try that for you again. hopefully that's all good. Okay. Let's see, where was I up to? Oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on in an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. A fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. So either what happens is you have this class struggle and it ends in a revolution, or everything goes to hell. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, and serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, there are subordinate gradations. So there's always these ranks of class, and within each class there are ranks again. So, for example, it's like saying you're lower class or middle class, and then you have upper middle class and lower middle class. There's kind of a ranking there. The modern bourgeois society, and by modern, we're talking about 1848, so keep that in mind as I read, that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society, has not done away with class antagonism. So modern society, there are still class antagonisms going on. But it has established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of old ones. So there are new oppressions that take the place of serfs or slaves or those kinds of things. And in 1848, probably still a lot of slaves. Even today, there's still a lot of slavery that happens in the world. Sexual slavery is a really big problem. In the United States is one of the worst places. Lots of children and women being sold into sexual slavery in the United States. Slavery is still a problem. That's not to say it's gone away, but there are new classes as well that cause this oppression. Our epoch, the current time of 1848, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns, so these people who had power. From the burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opening up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. So even in 1848, they were saying America is fertile ground for the bourgeois. And we see it now. All of the, big name people, they don't even start... For example, if we're looking at Elon Musk, he did not start off in the United States, he started off in South Africa, but he moved to the United States and he made a lot of money and became one of the richest men in the world. Maybe not so much anymore with the Twitter stuff, but you see what I mean. America, fertile ground for the bourgeois. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. Yeah, fertile as hell. Fertile as volcanic soil. So basically what goes on to happen here is that guild industry turns into manufacturing, which turns into industrialization, which turns into this really fertile ground for the bourgeois to rise. So the feudal system of industry, in which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, no longer sufficed for growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. So guild industry goes to manufacturing, The guild masters were pushed aside, and the manufacturing middle class, by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labour between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of the division of labour in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing and the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon steam and machinery, again we're talking 1848, so, revolutionised industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. So what it's saying is, we took away the, oh, it's Cat Cam, look at that baby, she's so cute. Hello, little baby, you want a pat? You want to come say hello to everyone? Come on. Come on, princess. Yeah, come on, little princess. Come and say hello. She's not very smoochy. We're trying to make her more smoochy because she was a street cat when we adopted her. But she's very cute and I love her a lot. Yes, it's the baby. She's having a nap. She just woke up. Oh, you're a good baby. Yeah. She might wander over here and jump all over me. Jump all over my desk in a bit. She does like to do that. Or she might be out the door and I'll have to get up and let her out. We'll see. Oh, back to sleep. Okay. She loves to sleep on my hoodie and she makes little biscuits on there. Is she making biscuits? No, no biscuits right now. She's just watching. Okay. So yeah, so they're saying that like the guild sort of disappeared and people took over and there was a division of labour amongst different people who could do the different tasks. But then the demand was exceeded and so we started this process of industrialisation, and industrialisation is basically what caused the bourgeois. And we'll see more and more of this as we get into highly robotic industrialisation where quote-unquote unskilled labour becomes a thing of the past. There's no such fucking thing as unskilled labour. If you can do a thing, you have a skill in it. I've worked in some of the least skilled jobs ever, and I tell you what, there is just the way you have to move your hands to do a thing, to pack a thing, you know, that takes skill, and I really hate that term, unskilled labour. But anyway, a lot of those sorts of things where you're talking about packing and pick packing and all of those sorts of warehousing jobs, that kind of stuff is going to become a thing of the past as time goes on, which is going to further increase this, because we can see it was already happening in the Industrial Revolution during the 1800s. So, isn't that right, little baby? Yeah. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing and the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of industrial middle class by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. Modern industry has established the world market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has in its turn reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion to its industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended. In the same proportion, the bourgeois developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeois is itself the product of a long course of development. So every class struggle that happens now is based on previous class struggles, comes out of previous classes. The modern billionaires of today and trillionaires of today came out of the Industrial Revolution's millionaire bourgeois. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. So there has to be political advancement with monetary advancement, and we see that when we look at people like Elon Musk, when we look at people like Jeffrey Bezos, we see that they have this power to buy political champions, people to determine their interests. And even though we have the people power as the proletariat, we don't necessarily have the buying power of a Jeffrey Bezos, because no one does. So the only way to combat that is to use people power and not necessarily monetary power, because we just don't have it. An oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune, here independent urban republic as in Italy and Germany, the taxable third estate of the monarchy as in France, afterwards in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself in the modern representative state exclusive political sway. No one else has the same political sway. You could propose that Jeffrey Bezos has more political sway now than the Queen of England does, because she's not allowed to have a say in anything. So monarchy's gone. The modern monarchy is the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie is whoever has the money. So you can see that this is still, 1848, still really prevalent today. Still, a lot of this sort of talk is still prominent or still relevant. There are a lot of things that aren't relevant anymore, or I think need to be changed given our modern conception of the way that people work, and we'll get into that as we go. Not to say that I'm in any great shakes, but this was written in 1848, and you'll notice it in some areas. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. So that's basically saying that the politics of the rich, politics is of the rich and not of the people now. And this is in 1848, so you can imagine what it's like now. The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, however, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal and idyllic relations. I would argue maybe not patriarchal relations, because there's a whole thing going on there, but given that most of the 1% are men, but anyway. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound men to his natural superiors, and has left no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. So basically saying it replaced the monarchy. So rather than having what people thought of as natural superiors in the monarchy because they thought they were ordained by God, we now have people who are ruling over other people on basis of having money. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervour, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. Selfish self-advancement, basically. It has resolved personal wealth into exchange value, and in place of numberless, indefeasible, chartered freedoms, it has set up that single, unconscionable freedom. Free trade. Free trade, not so free as we'll hear. In one word, for exploitation veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. Saying free trade exploits workers and is a brutal exploitation. which I think is really powerful. While my little kitty is just cleaning herself in the background, we talk about brutal exploitation, but anyway. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honoured and looked upon in reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage labourers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. You have to take care of your family, you give them money, etc., etc. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigour in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production. So that, again, we're talking about, creating things to get rid of the workforce. It wants to be bigger, better, faster, all of these things. And, that's at the expense of the people, but also now at the expense of our natural world and killing our natural world. So, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeois epoch from all previous ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. So it's saying that, every time something new comes along, it's antiquated immediately, and we replace it with something else, and we can see that in technology especially. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeois ever over the surface of the globe. So basically saying the more we want and need, the more we become enslaved to the rich. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere, and that increases globalization, and it leads to things like the salt shaker I bought the other day that has salt from Australia in it that was packaged in the US and then brought back here. Ridiculous and ruining the earth. I didn't see that when I bought it. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionaries, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. Elaborate on what? Was there something that you wanted me to elaborate on? Or were you saying that was an elaborate way to get the salt? Anyways. Yeah, it's weirdly elaborate, and it's because, you're saving probably, a few dollars a pound or whatever on salt, a few dollars a kilo on salt, to do it that way, because you've got the packaging stuff already in the United States, and then to re-establish it here in Australia, to sell it to an Australian market would cost some money. So rather than do that, they send it over and send it back, and then they use all these fossil fuels to send it over and back, and it further damages our environment. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionaries, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed. So basically saying that countries don't own their wealth anymore. People own the wealth of nations, or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. So again, Australian salt going to America to be sent back here. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home but in every quarter of the globe. So, you know, getting peaches from America sent here, even though we grow our own here, that kind of thing. In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. For example, we make a lot of raw product here for phones, but we don't make phones here. It gets sent overseas to get made into components. The components get sent somewhere else. The phones get made, they get shipped to wherever they get shipped to, and then they get shipped to here into a local area. So there's a lot of moving of stuff around rather than, you know, working up what is available in the country or in the area and using that building industry in those areas to use that product. And because of industrialization, we want more and more of it, and so it continues to happen. They probably weren't thinking about climate change at the time because it wasn't really a thing in 1848 to be thinking about, but it definitely has contributed to it. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction. Here, intercourse means coming together, which it doesn't always in the other sense. Universal independence of nations, and as in materials, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there arise a world literature. So it's talking there about globalism. Globalism, not globalists. We're not talking about Alex Jones. God, are we never talking about Alex Jones. Unless we are, to laugh at him. But that's it. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. Again, this is 1848, so you'll have to excuse some of the wording of this. The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians, again, racism, intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. So it's basically saying the bourgeoisie, mostly Americans, the French, other Europeans, and the English, pushed this idea of capitalism into every corner of the world because it was the only way that they could get what they wanted. So they forced every other nation to capitulate, even if they didn't want to. And you can learn all about that with like the opium trade and all of that sort of stuff. If you don't listen to Behind the Bastards, I highly recommend it, if you're interested in this kind of thing. It compels all nations on pain of extinction, so do a capitalism or we will kill you, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e. to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. So yeah, do what we say or we will drop bombs on you. Don't be communist or we will kill you. Now that hasn't necessarily worked in China, although to say China is communist would be to miss the point. They're more of a fascist state than anything. The bourgeois has subjected the country to the rule of the towns. It has created enormous cities has greatly increased the urban population, so we're talking there about urbanization, as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Ouch! Hey, I come from rural life, dang it. Just as it has made the country dependent on towns, so has it made the barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeois, the East on the West. So it's basically saying that we introduced all this stuff, and now we've made the people we introduced to capitalism dependent on the capitalism. So, for example, the global south becomes disadvantaged and they rely on quote-unquote westernized countries. The bourgeois keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population of the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated population, or assimilated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. And we know a lot of who those few hands are. We can name them. I can tell you Jeffrey Bezos. I can tell you Elon Musk. I can tell you, that a lot of these people's names, and some of them we don't know. They keep them pretty close to the chest. But, like, Jeffrey Bezos has the most money of anyone in the world. We know that, We know whose hands they're in. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation, with one government, one code of laws, one natural class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. So, for example, the states united into the United States, that sort of thing. The bourgeois, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all the preceding generations together. So, this is 1848, so we're talking like 1748 onwards. There was this explosive growth in all of these areas and inroads into areas not previously seen before, and new countries rising, old countries and regions falling, this sort of thing was just happening at a rapid pace. Now the whole country thing happens less rapidly, but there is still explosive growth of wealth for the bourgeoisie. Subjection of nations' forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even the presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labour. So basically saying, who knew that together we could create so much as we've created, do so much as we've done? We see then the means of production and of exchange on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up. See you, Lady Lucas. So lovely to see you again. We see then the means of production and of exchange on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property, became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. There became so many fetters, they had to be burst asunder. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it, and by the economic and political sway of the bourgeois class. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern bourgeois society, with its relations of production, of exchange and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and exchange, is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the spells of the netherworld, whom he is called upon by his whom he has called upon by his spells. So the bourgeois have summoned a demon they can no longer control. For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises that, by their periodical return, put the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trial, each time more threateningly. So it's saying that the bourgeois is threatened, and this is almost 200 years ago now. Yikes, Marx, you were a bit off the note with that one, bud. If anything, they've only grown more powerful. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that, in all earlier epochs, would have seemed absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. So, this is talking about things like when there's too many crops, and so the price goes down. So we had that big thing with, people couldn't get strawberries and the price went way, way up. And so people then didn't buy strawberries, and now we have an overabundance of strawberries. So now everyone's being like, buy more strawberries because they're really cheap and we need to sell them, that kind of thing. Or in this case, tulips. So that the whole big tulip thing that happened ages ago, if you're aware of that. Or like in Animal Crossing, the island fruit that you have, you only sell that one for like 100, but if you get fruit from another island and grow it on your island, you have less of it, so it's worth more. So, that kind of thing. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed, and why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry and too much commerce. So there's devastation because of supply and demand, basically. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of the bourgeois property. On the contrary, they've become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon they are overcome. These fetters, they bring disorder into the whole bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them, and how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces, and on the other hand, by the conquest of new markets, and by the more thorough exploitation of old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. So you create needs to stop overproduction. Oftentimes that comes about as a result of wars. So we know the military-industrial complex is very similar to this. They build a whole bunch of bombs, but nobody needs the bombs, so then it's like, oh no, we're going to have to lay people off, and it's going to be bad, and all this sort of stuff. So we create a war. So there is need for the bombs, and people buy the bombs. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. And now we get to talking about the proletarians, who are those people that are you and I, basically. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e. capital, is developed, in the same proportion is the proletariat, the modern working class, developed. A class of labourers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labour increases capital. So you can only live if you live to work, you can only work if you work to live. These labourers who must sell themselves piecemeal are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. So not only do we as workers take on this labour cost to our bodies, but we also take on the fluctuations of the market. The people at the top are not facing any of the backlash or the things that happen when the market fluctuates. They're still getting theirs, but the workers have to take that on, either through increased produce prices, through having to work more, being paid less, not getting pay rises that align with raises in cost of living, this kind of thing. That's what happens to us as the proletariat, as a way to buffer anything happening to, say, Jeffrey Bezos or those sorts of people at the top. And I harp on Bezos a lot because, you know, you're talking about these factory workers working for Amazon and things like that. When Bezos was making so much fucking money, when everyone was locked in their houses and was buying stuff, he was not handing that down to his workers. He was not putting in place, you know, safety measures for them. He was not doing any of that. He was not helping them to be able to live. In fact, he was making it worse for them and profiting off their misery. And that's what the bourgeoisie do to the proletariat all the time. That is the role of the proletariat in the minds of the bourgeois. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons. Oh, we already talked to that part. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and to division of labour, the work of proletarians has lost all individual character, and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine. So you're a machinist, you're a person who does a thing. And if you weren't there, someone else would do the thing, is basically it. And it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance, and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also of labour, is equal to the cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. So, for example, you know, working in a meat packing place is really gross. I've worked in one. And the hours are long and it hurts a lot to work in those places, and you get paid peanuts compared to someone who works in an office as a, you know, personal assistant. They get paid more. Even though this person is putting up with so much fucking horrendous shit to make sure that you have meat on your table, and this person types and answers a phone. You know, it's not to say that either one of them are not worthwhile things to do, but, you know, we're not paying people money commensurate with the labour cost that is coming out of their bodies. I don't think that's the only way to measure labour costs, and we'll talk about that more if we go into The Conquest of Bread, because it goes into it a lot better. It's more of a socialist book, and it talks about that a lot, in a lot more clarity. But in this case, that's what they're talking about. Nay, more, in proportion to the use of machinery and division of labour increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases. So because of the cost of labour, work is only human subsistence. It's seen as cheap and gross. And that's why people dehumanise servers in restaurants. That's why people dehumanise factory workers. That's why people dehumanise or essential worker people in retail. This kind of thing. That's why we had all of that and have all of that during this COVID crisis that we're undergoing. And to make it cheaper, they work people to death. Literal death in the case of COVID. Whether by prolongation of working hours, by increase of the work exacted in the given time, or by increasing the speed of machinery. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrialized capitalists. Masses of labourers crowded into the factory are organised like soldiers. I haven't used the Twitch app in months, but I see they still haven't got it to work reliably with the Chromecast. Yeah, not always. Not sure why that is. Hello, Dubmo. Nice to see you. We are in part 1. We're talking about proletarians and bourgeoisie at the moment. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it is. The less the skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labour, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, and the more is the labour of men superseded by that of women. So basically this is 1848, so women are just starting to come into the workplace at this point, and basically what they're saying is, now that you're just an extension of the machine itself, unskilled women can join, which is like, it is a product of its times. And that's why when I talk about it, I talk about, it has some good things, some interesting points, but you can't take it wholly and solely the way it is, because it has a lot of the prejudices of an 1848 manuscript and is racist and sexist and less so classist because it's specifically targeting that, but in some ways still. The more openly this despotism proclaims to gain... sorry, I missed a bit. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labour, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex. So basically implying that it obfuscates slavery and it allows cheaper labour. So saying that it will always choose the cheapest labour. So at the time when this was written, a lot of that was women. It was also slavery, things like that. But then also now we're talking about labour from countries where they don't have good working conditions, where workers' rights are not very well established, where people are willing to work for very little amounts of money, and that's why we have this happening where a lot of industry is going overseas to countries where workers are not well protected. No sooner is the exploitation of the labourer by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash than he sets upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. The lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers and retired tradesmen generally, the handicraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletarian, partly because of the diminutive capital, which does not suffice for the scale of the modern industry, is carried on, and is swamped by the competition of the larger capitalists, partly because their specialised skill is rendered worthless by new methods of production. Thus the proletarian is recruited from all classes of the population. So it's basically predicting the vanishing of the middle class. So rather than having middle class, so to speak, we will have the bourgeois at the top, the 1%, and everybody else is underneath. At the moment, we still think of there being a middle class because a lot of people in the middle class identify themselves with the bourgeois falsely, but they're not a part of the bourgeois, they're part of the proletarian. And by identifying as part of the bourgeois, all they are doing is making the case for the proletarian worse. The proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie. So, from birth. At first the contest is carried on by individual labourers, and then by work people of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeois conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. So misplaced anger at automation is basically what they're talking about there. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labour. They smash the pieces of machinery. They set the factories ablaze. They seek to restore the force and vanished status of the workmen of the Middle Ages. So people get angry at automation, but it's really the bourgeoisie they should be angry at. At this stage, the labourers still form an... Oh, and also they get really xenophobic about labour going overseas as if it's the fault of the people who are then being employed for pennies a day, that they're being employed for pennies a day, when really it's the fault of the people that earn all the money, that they're being, at the top, that are earning all the money, that it's their fault that that's happening, but nobody gets angry at fucking Tesla or fucking, nobody gets angry at Bezos or whatever for what he's doing. They get angry at the poor people who are working for pennies on the dollar, which is ridiculous. And that's a targeted thing. The bourgeois want you to be angry at those people because they never want that ire, that Sauron's eye of the proletariat to turn on them, ever. At this stage, the labourers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anywhere they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet a consequence of their own active union, but of the union of the bourgeoisie, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion, and is moreover yet, for a time, able to do so. So oftentimes, it's saying labour unions and things act to reinforce these kind of divides, class antagonisms against, that are xenophobic or against industrialization and those sorts of things, because it profits the bourgeoisie to do that. A lot of labour unions and things like that don't turn their eye to the bourgeoisie, who are the people who they should be doing that too. Now, that's gotten better over time. Some labour unions are much better at doing that than others and things like that, but there's still this huge difficulty with labour unions and changes to labour unions in the last, say, 20 or 30 years. Like a movement away from labour unions has meant that we're not coming together to talk about these things either. Yeah, some unions are owned. And run by Catholic conservatives. Exactly. So they're run by the very people that they should be, joining together to push back against. Or because they have the political might and the political power, the bourgeoisie are able to influence the amount of power that unions can have and where they can point their ire. And so in so doing, they take the guts out of proletariat unions. Like they take the ability to do anything out of proletariat unions. Join the RAFFWU. I have no idea what that stands for. The RAFWU? You can tell me while I eat a Zappo. It was my lovely Marty McCourse's birthday party on the weekend, and they bought a whole giant box of these Zappo things. Do you guys remember these? They look like this, and I have a couple of packets here because we were eating them in bed on Sunday, and they got left here. So, Retail something and Fast Food Workers Union. Retail, let's look it up. We can take a minute away from this to look that up. Yeah, Retail and Fast Food Workers Union. You can derail me. Most people haven't, and I'm happy to be derailed at any point. Are you? Maybe. I doubt that pretty highly. I think I know you pretty well. I didn't know that the SGA was particularly bad. I think one of my sisters was a union representative for the SDA. I will send you to the gulag where you must make me ice cream sundaes. And also, spaghetti. Because I like how you make spaghetti. I had, shakshuka for my dinner. It was really good. Nathan is away, so I can eat onions, which is nice. Look, it's, baby Cam. She's sleeping again. Aww. I need a second camera so I can just have baby Cam on all the time. Have a little bit up in the corner here. That's just baby Cam. So when people get bored with me, they can watch the baby. Where was I up to? At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies. The remnants of absolute monarchy, the landowners, the non-industrial bourgeois, the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Every victory so obtained is a victory for the bourgeoisie. But with the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels the strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized, in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition amongst the bourgeois and the resulting commercial crises make the wages of workers ever more fluctuating. So wages are changing all the time, and in this way I think it's almost talking about or predicting the gig economy. The unceasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more to form the combinations, trade unions, against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. So it's talking about strikes and things like that. There was a strike, tram workers' strike today, for instance, but striking is heavily controlled by the bourgeoisie. You can only strike under certain conditions and have it be legal, that kind of thing. Oh, hello, baby. Are you listening to me talk? Look at this little baby. There she is. So cute. Hydrate. Okay. I will hydrate. This is helpful to me because swallowing is like swallowing sand right now, so making me hydrate is helpful. It's getting better though. Look at this little baby. She wants to learn about the bourgeoisie, don't you, baby? Yeah. Behead the capitalist, little baby. Oh, a baby yawn. No. So cute. Okay. That's okay, Dubmo. Thanks for popping in. Hopefully you can, thank you. Hopefully you can get it working for when we do the, oh, another baby yawn. For when we do the, Joy of Sex, which I might do next week to break up the political stuff. I'll have to come over and see if I can get it working on your TV. Oh, look at that big yawn. So many big yawns for the little tiny baby. Whoa. Oh, big yawn. Sorry, I'm just playing with my cat now. Just looking at her. She's so cute. So many big yawns. Oh, big stretch. So cute. Let's see. But with the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows and it feels the strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level, as we were talking about before. Blah, blah, blah. Keep going. Okay. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. So you might get a pay rise today, but that doesn't mean you're going to continue to get pay rises that, line up with the cost of living and things like that. The real fruit of their battles lies not in the immediate result, but in the ever-expanding union of the workers. So continuing to get people to join the union by showing them what the union can do is the only real fruit of the labour. This union is helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry and that place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralise the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one national struggle between classes, but every class struggle is a political struggle. And that union, to attain which the burghers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, required centuries, the modern proletarians, thanks to railway, achieve in a few years, or thanks to the internet, can achieve practically overnight as compared to 1848. This organisation of the proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. So, this one wants this and this one wants that, and I want to be in charge, no, I'm in charge, this kind of thing, and that upsets the apple cart when you're trying to organise. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer and mightier, so it gets better the more it goes along. We're seeing a decline lately though, so that's of interest. And she's cleaning her butt, so I'm going to give her some privacy here. Let's see. Thus, the 10 hours bill in England was carried. So this is talking about improvements in the rights of workers for how many hours a day they were able to work and this sort of thing. Altogether, collisions between the classes of the old society further in many ways the course of development of the proletariat. The bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle. At first the aristocracy, later on with those proportions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry. At all times at the bourgeoisie of foreign countries, in all these battles it sees itself compelled to appeal to the proletariat, to ask for its help and thus to drag it into a political arena. The bourgeoisie itself, therefore, supplies the proletariat with its own elements of political and general education. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. So it removes the arts, humanities, history, education. It lowers the education level of people that are proletariat. It takes money out of public schools and puts it into private schools, this kind of thing. In the Liberal Party circles, they call this starving the beast. Basically, we as the proletariat are considered the beast, and to starve us, you must take the means of extended thought and higher thinking out of our hands, so that we don't have the means, the time, or the opportunity to ever do that. And if we don't have the means, the time, or the opportunity, we're not able to think our way or organize our way out of the situation in which we find ourselves. We're not able to have a revolution. In all these, so further, we have already seen entire sections of the ruling class are by the advance of industry. Oh, my headphones have gone off and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because I haven't had anything playing through them for a while. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of the ruling classes are by the advance of industry precipitated into the proletariat, or are at least threatened in their conditions of existence. These so supply the proletariat with fresh elements of enlightenment and progress. So, despite this want to starve the beast, it persists. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the process of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact within the whole range of old society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class, the class that holds the future in its hands. Just as, therefore, at an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, so now a portion of the bourgeoisie goes to the proletariat, and in particular a portion of the bourgeois ideologists, who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole. So, sometimes, very occasionally, people from the bourgeoisie will understand what's happening and they'll decide that they don't like it and they'll join the proletariat. But we're seeing this less and less now. This happened a lot more probably in 1848 than it does now. Of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is the really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry, and they pretty much have at this point. The proletariat is its special and essential product. The lower middle class, the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, these still exist, but maybe not so much the peasant, but these still exist, but just not a lot of them. All these fight against the bourgeoisie to save from their extinction from existence as fractions of the middle class. We don't see that anymore. What we see is that they identify themselves as the bourgeoisie when they're not. They are therefore not revolutionary, but conservative. And you see that in the way that people vote. If they exist in this, middle class, they often vote conservative, even though it's directly against their own interests and the interests of the proletariat, which they are essentially a part of at this point. And that's why the Liberals, for instance, win the small business owners all the time. Nay, more, they are reactionary, for they try to roll back the wheel of history. If by chance they are revolutionary, they are so only in view of their impending transfer to the proletariat. They thus defend not their present but their future interests. They desert their own standpoint to place themselves at that of the proletariat. The dangerous class, the social scum, I'm scum, as the idols would say, or idols, they're not the idols, as idols would say. That passively rotting mass thrown off by the lowest layers of old society may here and there be swept into the movement of the proletarian revolution. I wrote here, bit harsh there, Marks, but I do love the song Scum, or I'm Scum by Idols, and I probably would get it tattooed on me, so I don't know if it's really a bit harsh, but yeah. Social scum! That passively rotting mass thrown off by the lowest layers of old society may here and there be swept into the movement of a proletarian revolution. Its conditions of life, however, prepare it far more for the part of a bribed tool of reactionary intrigue. In the conditions of the proletariat, those of old society at large are already virtually swamped. The proletarian is without property. His relation to his wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeois family relations. Modern industrial labour... Shop S-come. Hello, Nathan. I've missed you, my love. Nathan has been away working, like a good, proud proletarian. And I've missed him immensely. Look, baby, it's our baby. She having a snoozle on my bed. She's been snoozing there the whole time. Do you miss her? You probably do. Are you coming home soon? Please tell me you're coming home soon. Wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeoisie family relations, modern industrial labour. Oh wait, yeah. Modern subjection to capital and the same in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him so many bourgeois prejudices, behind which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeois interests. Yep, yay, I do miss her. There she is, look her little ears. She having a little snoozle. I need another camera so I can just have cat cam. Do you know when you're coming home yet? I hope it's soon. Law, morality, religion to him are so many bourgeois prejudices behind which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeois interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjecting society at large to their conditions of appropriation. The proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property. And by property, we're not talking about, I own this pencil. We're talking about property in terms of I own the means of production by which all other people must produce and I pay them. We don't own that. So we don't have to protect that. In fact, because we don't own that, we need to destroy that to be able to even the playing field for everybody. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities, or in the interest of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of immense majority, in the interest of the immense majority. The proletarian, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. Though not in substance, yet in form, the struggle of the proletarian must, with the bourgeoisie, is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. In depicting the most general phrases of the development of the proletariat, we trace the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society, up to the point where the war breaks out into open revolution and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. So we need violent revolution or it will not happen. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes. But in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it, under which it can at least continue its slavish existence. The serf in the period of serfdom raises himself to membership in the commune, just as the petty bourgeoisie, under the yoke of feudal abolitionism, managed to develop into a bourgeois. The modern labourer, on the contrary, instead of rising with the progress of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. So we get worse and worse as they get better and better. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops, or a poor person, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. So people are getting poorer and poorer more rapidly than we develop wealth. And here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class of society. And I think that's one of the most powerful statements in this whole thing. The bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class of society. They are not fit to take care of the people because they do not take care of the people. And they don't care for the people. They only care for their own wealth. And to impose its conditions of existence upon society as an overriding law. It is unfit to rule because it is incompetent to ensure an existence to its slave within his slavery. We are wage slaves, and we are being made to live poor and to die poor by the bourgeoisie. And because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. So they bitch and they whinge about having to pay for people to receive healthcare and all of this shit because they're not paying people enough to get healthcare to be able to pay for it themselves. And so they're not fit to rule. They rule and they're not fit to. And they're not the type of people that should be in charge of anything, let alone the vast, vast wealth of nations. Not just one, but all nations. Society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. I repeat that again. The existence of the bourgeoisie, of the Jeffrey Bezoses, of the what's-his-face, the Microsoft dude, all of those guys. It's not compatible with society. Anyone that was on Epstein's Island, not compatible, right? We can't allow them to continue to rule. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labour. Wage labour rests exclusively on competition between labourers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the labourers due to competition by their revolutionary combination, due to association. Except the children. Oh, yes, except the children on the island, yeah. The development of modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. I think that's a bit of wishful thinking. Marx there is saying that eventually you will create so much of the proletariat that we will overthrow the bourgeoisie and rid ourselves of them. And given how things have been the last few years, and the whole starving the beast thing, which has vastly changed the landscape of the way people look at these masters of industry that own all of this production, this bourgeoisie class, I find that a little bit of wishful thinking. I don't know how much I think that will actually happen in my lifetime at any rate. But perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps I'm a little bit jaded. Who knows? So that brings us to part 2, which is proletarians and communists. I think there are 4 parts in all, so I might... Let's see, how long is this next part? It's only a few pages, so maybe I'll read up to part 3. Part 3 gets pretty dense because it's talking about socialist and communist literature and the differences between. And so it's not really that great. The next part is probably the more impactful, and the 3rd and 4th parts are really only for the diehards who are super interested in what Marx and Engels thought about all of the different socialist movements and things that were happening at the time. And I will go through them at some point. But as I said, I've got tonsillitis at the moment. My voice is giving out a little bit. So I might read this next part because this is really impactful, and then I might do the other part at a later time. Later this week or something like that, depending on how my voice is feeling in a bit. There's not a lot more of this because it is quite short, but the last part again is pretty impactful. It's just this middle part that is a bit weird and hard to decipher because you have to know a lot of like the historical context of the different movements at the time. And we are going to go into more of them because I really want to read The Conquest of Bread. Nathan, I've read some of it to Nathan, and I think Nathan, you quite liked it, didn't you? The Conquest of Bread, maybe more so than this, because I think it's more forgiving to people in general, and it supposes better of people than perhaps this Communist Manifesto does. This sort of talks about people as being kind of idiots and things like that, which Conquest of Bread doesn't. It basically says that we can't... The biggest message I've taken away so far from Conquest of Bread is basically everyone contributes to society in different ways, and since we can't measure exactly how much they contribute and what that does for society, everyone should be treated justly and equally. So I think I like that a little bit more than this, but we'll get into why that is in a bit. I might just take a few minutes to stand up and stretch and move around. So I am going to put up my be right back screen, and I'll be right back in about 5 minutes or thereabouts. And I'm back. Oh, and the baby is under my feet now. Oh, okay, I will do stretch. Thank you. I don't know why my event list is not showing everything. Let's see. It should be. Anyways. Alright. Oh, the princess wants out. Hold up. Let me let her out. I do not want her to be in my room. Here you go. Can you get into the lounge room? No? I'll let you in. There you go. Then Princess Cam is finished. She needs to eat and poop, probably. So. Okay. So we're going to move on to part 2 now. It's only a couple of pages long, so if you're starting to fall asleep, it's okay. We'll pause after these few pages. Also, I'm thinking about streaming a game tomorrow or a watch party. So watching something that is on YouTube as public domain, if my internet will handle it. So, you know, up to you guys, whatever you think will be more fun. I know we did a lift-off watch party at one point, and that was really fun. So I'm thinking about searching up something else that has, you know, the whole catalogue online for us to watch. I know some people have done Beyond Belief, which I love. It's so funny, and also Beyond Belief and all of those like film star stuff is sort of public domain now. They've put it all on YouTube, so you can do that. If I do that, I won't be able to put that on YouTube, I don't think, because I think it will get taken down like for copyright, but it might be really fun to do that together and watch some dumb stuff. So if you have any suggestions for the dumb stuff that I should watch on my stream or games, you can go to my Discord, which my Discord name is there, so if you can't find the there. My Discord name is there, so if you can't find the Discord link, which is on my page, you can add me there, and then I'll add you to the server, and there is a request or I think it's called suggestions. Requests is the requests page, and you can just put in requests for whatever you think would be good for me to watch or play. So highly recommend doing that, because I'm open to all sorts of different things. I have lots of things I want to read and a few things I want to watch and play with you guys, and then I'm thinking maybe Thursday or Friday I'll play something maybe Thursday, and then maybe Friday. I can't remember if I'm away on Friday or not. So we'll see. But maybe we'll play some Jackbox or something fun then. So if you like playing games with me on stream, we might be able to play some games then. In what relation to the communists stand... part 2, proletarians and communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape the mould of the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat independently of all nationality. So they don't abide by borders. 2. The various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So it represents the whole at all stages. The immediate aim of communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, and conquest of political power by the proletariat. So the aim is to draw everyone together, overthrow the bourgeois, and for the proletariat, the majority, to take power. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. So it's not something that's been discovered. It comes as a part of a natural system of the person that is being oppressed and the oppressor. So it comes as a part of a natural overthrow of oppressors. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. So again, this is something that people who argue against communism say all the time, is they want to take away all your stuff. But Marx and Engels here are saying the opposite of that. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change, consequent upon the change of historical conditions. So changes in who owns what happen when revolutions happen. It's not just communism that seeks to do this. And in fact, the bourgeois have overtaken a lot of property that previously would have been in the hands of proletarians. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favour of bourgeois property. So you can see it's happened before. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. So again, that's really, really important, because it's always the thing that people who are against communism bring up, that they want to take all of your stuff away, all of your individual things, but that is not what communism is. Communism is the abolition of bourgeois property. It's the abolition of someone like Jeffrey Bezos owning the production of thousands of people who make him money. It's saying that that property should be in the hands of the people who are doing the labor. And that's the important distinction. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. So that's what they're trying to stop. They're taking control of the means of production to stop exploitation of the majority by the few, the 99% by the 1%. In this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. And when we say abolition of private property, people get that twisted. They think that means you're going to take my ability to own this watch, that's private property. That's not private property. That's individual property. Private property is taking the funds of Amazon out of the hands of Jeffrey Bezos and giving it to the people who are actually doing the work. Because let me tell you, he's not doing the work. He's not in the factory packing your packages, my dude. Sorry, I get really worked up about that. It really annoys me. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as a fruit of man's own labour. which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Property gained from work, right? Do you mean the property of the petty artisan or the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There's no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labour create property for the labourer? Not one bit. It creates capital, i.e. that kind of property that exploits wage labour. So we're talking about capital here, exploitation of wage labour, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labour for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labour. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal, but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product. It is produced by the many. And only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society can it be set into motion. You can only create capital if everyone is working towards creating capital. But the capital then goes into the hands of the bourgeois. They should not own the capital. The people, the proletariat, should own the capital, the production of their own labour. Capital is therefore not a personal but a social power. When therefore capital is converted into common property, so property owned by all, into the property of all members of its society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. So just because you own a watch doesn't mean your neighbour can say, this is my watch now, right? Because you have been given X amount of the production of your own labour, so you get given that amount and you can go and buy things with it, and that's okay, that's for you, right? That's personal property, not capital, or not social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. So capital is property through workers, not from work. The average price of wage labour is the minimum wage, i.e. the quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite for the labourer to have bare existence as a labourer. Just enough to survive and never to thrive. If we thrive, we pose a threat. What, therefore, the wage labourer appropriates by means of his labour merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of products of labour, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labour of others. So everyone should have enough to survive on, should have enough to live, but no one man, no one woman should have enough to command the labour of others and to say to others, you must work for me to earn your living. Let's see. All we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the labourer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. So they don't want to do away with other stuff, they just want to do away with the fact that you have to work for some person who, through no great skill of their own, has become part of the bourgeoisie. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. So the proletariat You and me and everyone else who works for someone else, we have no individuality. We don't get to express ourselves as individuals. We exist as a large mass that is made to serve only the bourgeoisie, who are the only ones that are allowed to live individually. And the abolition of this state of things is called the bourgeois. Abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk of free selling and buying and all other brave words of our bourgeois about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in the contrast with restricted selling and buying and the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communist abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production and of the bourgeoisie itself. So the bourgeoisie will constantly tell you that if production goes away, if capital goes away, then no one will produce anything and nothing will be accomplished. And that is complete and utter horse shit. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. More than that now. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of the 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with any form of property, the necessary condition for those for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. From the moment when labour can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into the social power capable of being monopolised, i.e. from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say, individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual, you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle-class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. So this is talking about landlords, it's talking about entrepreneurs, it's talking about people who own businesses, large businesses. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him the power to subjugate the labour of others by means of appropriation. It has been objected upon that upon abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. And research says that this is not the case. There is actual research into this, and that's not the case. When people don't have to live in mere subsistence, they actually get more done, and they tend to work better. According to the bourgeoisie society, ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness, for those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. Those who acquire anything do not work. Elon Musk doesn't fucking work. He gambles with money he gained through wage slavery and through being born into a rich family. He doesn't work. He fucks around with his rich friends, goes to Epstein's Island, flies into space with a bunch of other rich douchebags, and tries to get Grimes back on the booty call. He doesn't work. You, me, everyone else, we work. He doesn't work. Right? The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology. There can no longer be any wage labour when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have, in the same way, been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, and again, we're talking about, Elon Musk is no genius. He didn't create what the output of Tesla is. He bought a bunch of other people's intellectual property ideas, revolutionary stuff, their genius, and he packaged it in a nice little package and it made him money. He gambled with it, and that's it. You're forgetting about the entire hour a day Musk spends thinking about new ways to make his cars mow down children more efficiently. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that whole hour of work he does. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture, which is just not true. It's just horseshit. People think we'll stop advancing if we don't have to live a subsistent life, but that's just not true. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeoisie property the standard of your bourgeoisie notions of freedom, culture, and law, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois product and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. So it's basically saying that, of course the bourgeois think this way, because if they weren't getting paid they wouldn't do anything, because they're callous, heartless pricks. But you, me, and everybody else, we do things for deeper meanings, deeper reasons than that. If we didn't have to work to subsist, we could truly go after those things that make us happy and could tend to the world and make things better. I would still be out here wanting to help people, even if I didn't have to do it for money. Or the best way to travel to that island in Indonesia with weapons so he can feast in his truest form. Oh, yeah. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason the social forms springing from your present mode of production and the form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with the ever-ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. You believe what all the rich people before you did, that the only use of anything is to get rich, basically. Abolition of the family, even the most radical flare-up of this infamous proposal by the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. It is completely developed form of this family exists only among the bourgeoisie, but this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relationships when we replace home education by social. We have replaced home education with social education, and guess what? Things got better when we did. And your education, is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools? So back then, 1848, only the richest people could go to school. Now everyone can go to school, and we have gotten smarter, more intelligent, and live longer lives because of it. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do not seek to alter the character of the intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. And some of this still happens. So the bourgeoisie still influences the way that education happens. It's why we're seeing a loss of arts education, and arts education being under threat and not valued, is because the bourgeoisie only wants what will add to their production. And it doesn't value art, so art goes by the wayside. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more, by the action of modern industry, all family ties by the proletarians are torn asunder and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labour. Now, luckily, we have things that are outlawing child labour, but it still happens, and that's why you see people being sold into child sexual slavery, because sometimes it still happens for people, and now it's goes under the radar, but it's still being funded by the bourgeoisie and enforced by the bourgeoisie, because oftentimes the people that are doing that do not have enough money to subsist on their own, so they have to sell their children. They sell them into sexual slavery because it's the only position for them now. So it's still a product of the bourgeoisie. Even though we'd like to turn our heads away from it, it still happens all the time, especially in America. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the podcast Someplace Underneath. They do a really big series of that. It's Underneath, spelled Neith, underneath. And that's part of the Last Podcast Network, so you can find them there, and they go into that quite specifically. The sort of things that drive people to sell their children in the United States. It's really fucking harrowing, but it's really interesting. The bourgeois claptrap about... Oh no, we've gotten past that. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife as a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instrument of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion than the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. So he's basically saying, well, women are a commodity, so I can just use them to create children. Who does that sound like to you? Who has children all over the place and only uses women to create more children in his image? Who sees his wife as only a commodity to promote his own interests? Bill Gates. He has not even the suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of the bourgeois at a community of women which, they pretend, is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce communities of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. So, there's a little bit of kink-shaming from Marx there, but he's basically saying that they're all around fucking up everyone else as much as humanly possible, and you see that more in, you see a lot of it in tabloids of, millionaires and stuff like that, the Kim Kardashians and all of that kind of thing. We don't see a lot of it from the truly bourgeois because they pay the hush money. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus at the most what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing up from a system, i.e. of prostitution, both public and private. So there's a very narrow contextual understanding of sex work that exists in this work, and it's one of the things that I criticise the Communist Manifesto with. Obviously, it is a product of 1848, so it's talking about women and their product as being largely prostitution. Obviously, now women work in many different places and work just as much and as well as men do. Although we aren't nearly people who are assigned female at birth, I don't identify as that, but people who are assigned female at birth and trans women often are not nearly as compensated for their labour as other people for a whole host of reasons, but of course that understanding is lacking from here because it was written in 1848. So take that with a grain of salt, right? The communists are further approached with desiring to abolish countries and nationalities. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself with the nation it is, so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put to an end too, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put to an end too. So we should stop exploiting places like India and Bangladesh and China and all these other places that we outsource the work that white workers have unionized to ensure that we get paid a certain wage for. Or, for example, hospitality workers in the US, right? They get paid a very little amount, that kind of stuff. Stop outsourcing and exploiting other countries for their low wages. That sort of thing. That's what they're saying there. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing owing to the development of the bourgeoisie. That has not come to pass. To freedom of commerce and to the world market. So that has not come to pass. Those countries which are considered poorer or less developed are still being taken advantage of all the time by the bourgeoisie. To the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put to an end, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put to an end too. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious and philosophical and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Sick burn! Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations and his social life? What does the history of ideas prove? Then the intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. So if you get rid of the old conditions of existence, then the old ideas go as well. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the revolutionary bourgeoisie. So as people got less religious, we did away with feudalism for the bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the way of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. There are besides eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society, but communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assumed different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, viz. the exploitation of one part of society by another. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of ages past, despite all its multiplicity and variety it displays, moves with certain common forms, or general ideas which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. So, of course, it's going to get rid of a lot of these things because, it's a really radical change. But this is another thing that I have an issue with in terms of this manifesto. All it says is, yeah, we're going to get rid of all of that, but then it doesn't tell you what it's going to do. What's going to... How can it reassure people who, have religious beliefs and things that they would still be able to have those beliefs? It's saying that if we get rid of ruling classes, that we must also get rid of religious rulers and things like that. And doesn't necessarily allow for individual thought or organized religion. And I think that's one of the failings here, is that although we want to get rid of capitalism, I think there is an issue when you say to somebody, the thing that you base your spiritual belief around will also go by the wayside and is necessary for this to happen. And I think it's one of the stumbling blocks of communism. As much as I don't have any religious beliefs myself, I think that's often one of the things that scares people about communism, is that they, the Communist Manifesto says that if communism comes about, there won't be religion anymore, and that's... Or it says there won't be organised religion anymore anyway, and I think that's scary for a lot of people. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to a position of the ruling class, to win the battle for democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralise all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organised as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by the means of despotic inroads of the rights of property, and on the conditions of the bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable by a means entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. The measures will, of course, be different in different countries, because rising above nationalism comes after this step, right? Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally acceptable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. Not really sure what they mean by that, and it's not really elucidated in this either. If they're talking about people who move from one country to another, why should we take all their property, unless they're talking about bourgeois property, in which case I could understand. Centralisation of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with a state capital and exclusive monopoly. That's an interesting thing, because that requires that someone is there to facilitate that. And how do you do that without a ruling class? Centralisation of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Again, you have to create a flat power base from which that can be done, and who then oversees How do you do that? It's not really elucidated in here, but that's because it's a manifesto and not a procedural handbook, you know. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of soil generally in accordance with a common plan. So this is before climate change, but this would include, you know, working for the common good against climate change and things like that in this era probably. Equal obligations of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. So when they're talking about armies, they're not talking about armed forces, they're talking about people to work. And there is an issue here because they're talking about everyone has to work, right? You have to force everybody to do some work. And we know that not everybody is capable of it. And that's why I think I'm more interested in socialism, because socialism is a little more understanding of the fact that some people will have disabilities and things like that. They won't be able to work in every way. They won't be able to work all of the time. They won't be able to work what would be mandated hours, and there's a slightly more individualistic approach to that there. This is a very much a hard and fast rule for everybody, and I have an issue with that. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of population over the country. And that might not be necessarily compatible with today, because people want to live where they want to live. So you would have to, you know, the work would have to shift, and it would have to be a shift that people agreed to, and I'm not sure that you could necessarily do that. Free education for all children in public schools, which is a thing that has happened in most countries now. Abolition of children's factory labour in its present form, and a combination of education with industrial production. So that's happened in most places, but not in the global south, so we need to continue to help that along in the global south. And in, you know, what would falsely be deemed in other times third world countries, or countries which experience poverty. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of the vast associations of whole nations, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organised power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat, during its contest with the bourgeoisie, is compelled by the force of circumstances to organise itself as a class, if by means of a revolution it makes itself a ruling class, and as such sweeps away the force of old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonism and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is a condition for the free development of all. So this is where the current and past iterations, I think, of communism seem to have largely failed. And the largest part of most criticisms is that people think communism is by necessity dictatorial and authoritative, or authoritarian, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, because what Marx and Engels are saying there is that when you take away the power of the bourgeoisie and put it into the hands of the proletariat, then everyone should be able to develop at the same rate, or everyone should be able to develop freely. And that hasn't necessarily been the case in the past, because it hasn't won over the majority. So someone has had to be in this dictatorial place, and it's become fascist rather than communist. It's become a fascist rule with an iron fist rather than a communist rule whereby everybody gets along and is happy with the way things are for the majority. Because, you know, proletarians are the majority. And so that's where it's largely failed in the past, and why I don't think there's ever been a truly communist state. Because rather than putting the power in the hands of the people, it's usually some sort of dictatorial thing. So you know, when people hear the word communism, they often associate it with these really awful reigns of people in different places and with torture and trauma and all of these sorts of things. And that's because it hasn't ever been truly communist as a state. It's been largely dictatorial fascism, disguised as communism. Where the government takes over, but not to help the plight of the proletariat, but to become their own ruling class and basically go back to a feudalist sort of society or a fascist dictatorship sort of thing, rather than actually, you know, putting the power in the hands of the people. Even though sometimes the set dressing is communist. So, for example, you know, before the Berlin Wall fell, those on the communist side were given free healthcare and everybody worked and all of that sort of thing. And that's kind of a set dressing of communism, but it's not really communism because the power was not necessarily in the hands of the people, but in the hands of dictators, sort of dictators and things like that. So I think that's where people confuse communism a lot. They think of it as dictatorial and fascist, and it's not necessarily, or ever really, because it's not truly communist in that sense. There are some failings of communism. I talked about them. Some of the aims of communism being not necessarily compatible with the way that we see the world now, and with empathetic, you know, viewpoints of the world. But I don't think we can look at what we have previously conceived as communist nations and truly see them as that, because often, as I say, they were dictatorial and their power wasn't in the hands of the people. So anyway, that leads us to 2.5 hours of me rambling about communism. So I think I'm pretty much gonna leave it there for now. I have this one and nobody played it, and I really want to play it for you because I added this just for this very very stream tonight. So I'm going to play this one sound and then we'll finish off for the night. So thank you so much for coming along to my first stream of the week. So later in the week I'm going to do some gameplay and some watch parties and maybe some Jackbox, something like that. So keep an eye on all of that. And feel free to come along and play and have a good time with all of that. Thanks if you came along at any point, or if you're watching this on YouTube later. Oh! It's communism. It didn't play. What the heck? Let's try again. Huh. Alright. Something's happening. Huh. Let's try that again. Not sure why it's doing that. Now it's saying it's playing, but nothing's coming through. Can you guys hear it? it chooses right now to do this. Alright, let's see if we can get this going.
It's communism.
Did that work? Could you hear that? The one I was gonna play was this.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Spice. That was special just for Morganics, but I don't know if they're here. But that was just a little special one for them. So I don't know if they ended up coming in, but maybe they'll see it later. Anyway, so that's going to do us for today. I'm going to put this up on YouTube, so if you are seeing this afterwards, that's where it will be. Thank you so much for coming along. It was so nice to see everyone back, and I hope I can do some more streams later in the week. I love you guys very much. If you are seeing this on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe, and also join the Discord server for the Twitch stream. Come along to the Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/CharlieJoy, and join there. We're live a few times a week, hopefully, now that I've finished with everything. So yeah, come along, hang out. It's usually lots of fun. We don't always talk about politics. We have fun other times too. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a lovely night. Bye.